I'm Matt, just your average guy living in Chicago. I'm in my 30s, work as a software developer at a large IT firm, and spend most of my days staring at lines of code and navigating through endless meetings. It's a stable job, one that provides me with a comfortable life, and I've always prided myself on my ability to keep things simple. I'm not the kind of guy who craves excitement or drama. I prefer to keep my life predictable and secure. My wife, Laura, is a different story. She's vibrant and ambitious, a striking woman in her late 20s with a passion for her work that rivals my own. Laura works in marketing at the same company, where she's rapidly climbing the corporate ladder. Her energy is contagious. She can light up a room with her smile and engage everyone in conversation. People are drawn to her. I often joke that she could sell ice to an Eskimo, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that her colleagues adore her. We've been married for 3 years now, and while it hasn't always been smooth sailing, I genuinely thought we were building a life together. We met during a company event, and from the moment I first laid eyes on her, I was captivated. Our first few dates were filled with laughter and long conversations about our dreams and ambitions. It felt like we were two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together. Laura was everything I ever wanted in a partner: intelligent, supportive, and fiercely independent. Yet, as our marriage progressed, I noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. She began working longer hours, often coming home late and seemingly drained. When she did come home, there were nights when she would zone out, lost in her thoughts, and I'd sit across the table, wondering what was going on in her mind. I tried to talk to her about it, but she would just brush it off, saying she was busy with projects or overwhelmed with deadlines. I wanted to be supportive, to understand her struggles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if a wall had slowly been built between us. One that I couldn't quite breach. Friends would comment on how driven she was, how lucky I was to have such an accomplished wife, and I would nod along, but inside I felt a growing sense of unease. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't identify, a whisper that something wasn't right. As the months went by, the stress of her job seemed to overshadow our time together. I found myself longing for the carefree days of our early relationship, where we could laugh and be spontaneous. Now, our weekends were often consumed by her work emails, and I would watch as she became more consumed by her career ambitions. But despite all this, I believed in her. I wanted to trust her, to support her in every way I could, and I convinced myself that it was just a phase. Yet, deep down, a nagging doubt began to creep in, leaving me with an unsettling feeling that would soon change everything. It started as a whisper, a fleeting thought that brushed against my mind in the quiet moments of our evenings together. I'd look across the table at Laura, her eyes focused on her phone, typing furiously as I sipped my coffee, and I'd wonder when exactly things had shifted. It wasn't one single moment, it was a slow, creeping change that I initially dismissed as stress or the demands of her job. But as the weeks passed, the little things began to add up. Laura had always been dedicated to her work. That was part of what drew me to her in the first place. She thrived on challenges and took pride in her accomplishments. However, it was becoming increasingly clear that her commitment had morphed into something more consuming. I began to notice that she was frequently coming home late, often citing urgent meetings or last-minute projects. What had once been the norm, a 9-to-5 schedule, had turned into unpredictable hours that left me wondering if I was still part of her life. Some evenings she would stroll in after dark, her hair slightly tousled, as if she had just come from an event rather than a mundane day at the office. I'd ask her how her day went, and she would reply with a half-hearted busy, as usual, her gaze fixed on the floor or her phone. There was a sense of distance in her voice, a disconnect that made my heart sink. She had changed. The vibrant, bubbly woman I married was fading into someone I barely recognized. I began to notice other subtle shifts in her behavior as well. She had always been open with me, sharing the ups and downs of her day, but now there was a guardedness in her tone. An unwillingness to divulge details. Whenever I would press her for specifics about her day, she would deflect my questions, saying it was just work stuff and nothing worth discussing. It felt as though she had built a fortress around her professional life, and I was standing outside, unable to get in. Then there were the nights she would go out with her friends. At first, I was happy to encourage her to maintain her social life. Go out, have fun. You deserve it, I would say, trying to be supportive. But these nights were becoming more frequent, and the excuses for why she had to leave seemed increasingly flimsy. "We're just grabbing drinks," she would say, or "It's just a small get-together." Yet, as she slipped out the door, I'd feel that familiar knot tighten in my stomach, a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I casually mentioned a friend from work who had invited me to join a weekend basketball game. Laura paused, her fork suspended midair. And for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it guilt? "Sounds fun," she replied, too quickly, her voice lacking enthusiasm. It was as if she was more concerned about my plans than she had been about her recent nights out. That small moment hung in the air, lingering like a bad smell, and I felt a wave of unease wash over me. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to Laura's late nights and sudden changes. I started piecing together her schedule, marking the days she was home late and comparing it with the nights she went out. It was a pattern, a rhythm that I didn't understand. The intuitive part of me whispered that there was something deeper at play, a truth lurking just beyond my grasp. That's when I decided to dig a little deeper. I didn't want to believe that my fears could be true, but curiosity and dread propelled me forward. I began to observe her more closely, taking note of her interactions and the little details that often went unnoticed. I'd catch her texting with a smile that was unfamiliar to me or laughing at something on her phone, her laughter echoing through our once quiet apartment. Each instance felt like a small crack in our foundation, and I couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that was taking root in my mind. I was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant stepping into a world of uncertainty and heartache. The thought of betrayal was terrifying, but the reality of losing her was even more daunting. Little did I know, I was standing on the precipice of a discovery that would change everything. The first time I decided to follow Laura, it felt surreal. I could hardly believe I was resorting to such tactics, but desperation has a way of pushing you into corners you never thought you'd visit. I had to know the truth, and the whispers of suspicion had grown too loud to ignore. The idea of her being unfaithful gnawed at me, consuming my thoughts and casting a shadow over every waking moment. I remember the night before, tossing and turning in bed, replaying our conversations and her behavior over and over again in my mind. It was a Friday evening, and she had mentioned a last-minute project that would keep her at the office late. My heart raced as I realized this was my chance. I could no longer remain in the dark. I needed to see for myself what was happening. That evening, I parked a few blocks away from the office, heart pounding as I watched the glass doors where Laura often entered. The office lights glowed brightly against the darkening sky, and I felt an odd mixture of anxiety and determination. I knew this wasn't the path I wanted to take, but the uncertainty was driving me to seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the minutes passed, I saw familiar faces leave the building. Coworkers I recognized but didn't know personally. They waved goodbye to one another, laughter spilling into the night air. But my eyes remained fixed on the entrance, waiting for her to appear. When Laura finally stepped out, I felt my breath hitch. She looked beautiful, her hair cascading over her shoulders, and she wore that bright smile I had come to love. For a fleeting moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps I was just being paranoid. But that hope quickly faded as I noticed she wasn't alone. From the shadows of the building, I saw a tall figure walking beside her, none other than Jason, my colleague and friend. The very thought made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. To remain an observer rather than a participant. They walked side by side, their laughter ringing out as they strolled down the street. It felt like a punch to the gut, and I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface. I started my car and followed them at a distance, careful not to draw attention. They headed towards a nearby cafe, and I parked a few spots down, watching them through the window. The cafe was cozy, with warm lighting that cast soft shadows around the tables. I could see them inside, sitting at a small corner booth, and my heart sank as I pulled out my phone to start taking pictures. Each click of the camera felt like a nail being driven into my heart. They seemed so comfortable with each other, the way they leaned in close, sharing secrets and laughter. Laura's hand occasionally brushed against Jason's, a gesture that seemed innocent but was laced with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. I could hardly breathe as I captured moment after moment, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. After a while, I decided to move closer, positioning myself at a table just a few feet away. The clinking of coffee cups and soft murmurs of conversation surrounded me, but I was focused solely on them. It was uncomfortable, like I was intruding on something deeply personal, but I needed this, needed to see the truth for myself. As I eavesdropped, snippets of their conversation reached my ears. "I can't believe we pulled that off," Jason said, laughing. "You saved my skin, Laura." Her response was light and teasing, and I could see the way her eyes sparkled at him. It felt like a betrayal of the most profound kind, one that cut deeper than any words could express. I wanted to scream, to confront them both, but I held back, letting the moment wash over me like a tidal wave of emotion. My heart raced as I focused on the details. I listened intently, trying to piece together the context of their relationship. They talked about work, yes, but there was an unmistakable undertone of familiarity, an intimacy that felt foreign to me. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that perhaps they were simply good friends. But deep down, I knew the truth was staring me in the face. As they finished their drinks and prepared to leave, I snapped a final photo of them walking out of the cafe, side by side, laughter echoing in the night. The sight made my heart drop. It felt like I was witnessing a moment meant only for them. I followed them back to the car, keeping my distance, but my heart was racing with each step they took. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every detail in my mind, the images on my phone now seared into my memory. Each photo was a testament to the betrayal I felt, and with each passing moment, I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, demanding to be released. I knew I had gathered enough evidence to confront Laura, but as I stared at the photos in the dark, a part of me wondered if I was prepared for what lay ahead. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. I had just returned home from work, exhausted and ready to unwind. The memory of the previous weekend lingered in my mind, the pictures of Laura and Jason together playing on a loop, taunting me like a cruel joke. My gut was churning with anxiety, and every time I thought about them, a fresh wave of anger washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. As I stepped into our apartment, the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla greeted me, but today it felt suffocating. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, expecting to find Laura there, maybe cooking or preparing dinner as she often did. Instead, the kitchen was empty, and the silence hung in the air like an uninvited guest. I glanced at the clock. She should have been home by now. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she probably got caught up in another meeting or project, but the nagging voice in my head urged me to check my phone for any updates. As I sat down on the couch, I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. Nothing from Laura. My heart raced as I pulled out my laptop, deciding to take a look at my work email and distract myself for a while. But before I could dive into work, I heard the familiar sound of the door unlocking. I looked up just as Laura walked in, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. She carried a large tote bag and a stack of files, a whirlwind of energy that usually filled the room with life. But today, that energy felt different. There was a tension in her posture that caught my attention immediately. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her voice a little too bright, too rehearsed. "Yeah, I wrapped up some things and decided to head back." "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart raced. "Oh, you know how it is, meetings, presentations. The usual chaos," she replied, avoiding my gaze as she moved to the counter, unloading her bag. As she busied herself, I felt a strange mix of relief and frustration wash over me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to confront her, to demand the truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Laura," I started, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I need to talk to you about something important." She paused, turning slightly toward me, her expression shifting from casual to cautious. "Sure, what's up? I've noticed some things lately, your late nights, the phone calls, and especially how close you've gotten to Jason." My heart raced as I spoke, each word feeling like a weight lifted from my chest. "I need to know what's going on." Her reaction was immediate, a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, crossing her face. For a brief moment, it felt like time stopped, the world around us fading into silence. She hesitated, clearly weighing her response, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Matt, it's not what you think. Jason and I are just friends, work friends," she replied, her voice faltering slightly. "Just friends?" I pressed, anger bubbling to the surface. "Then why was I following you last week? Why did I see you two together at that cafe, laughing and looking so cozy?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Laura's face paled as the truth settled between us like a chasm. "You were following me?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "How could you do that? How could you do this to me?" I shot back, my voice cracking with emotion. "I trusted you. You've been lying to me." For a moment, the air crackled with tension. I watched as realization washed over her face, her defenses crumbling. I could see the hurt in her eyes, and part of me felt a twinge of guilt. But the pain of betrayal was too strong, overshadowing any lingering affection I had for her. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just developed. Jason and I were working on a project together, and things got complicated." Complicated? I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "You call this complicated? You've been cheating on me, Laura. Do you even hear yourself?" The words stung, and I could see her struggle to find the right ones to defend herself. She stepped closer, desperation etched on her face. "Matt, please. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you." I could feel the betrayal coursing through me, leaving me feeling hollow and humiliated. The woman I loved was standing in front of me. But at that moment, she felt like a stranger. The memories of our life together, the laughter, the love, the dreams, flashed before my eyes, each one a reminder of what I was about to lose. "You should have thought about that before getting involved with him," I snapped, my voice rising in anger. "You've destroyed everything we built together." She took a step back, tears glistening in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. My heart was shattered, and I felt a mix of rage and sadness crashing over me like waves in a storm. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice cold and detached. I turned away from her, needing to escape the suffocating reality of what was happening. As I walked away, I could hear her quiet sobs behind me, but it felt like a distant echo, something I couldn't process, couldn't accept. I was left grappling with the weight of betrayal, the feeling of being cast aside by the one person I thought I could trust. At that moment, I made a decision, a dark, vengeful one. I wouldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. I would make her pay for the pain she had caused me, for the trust she had shattered. The road ahead was murky, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. The emotional storm inside me swirled relentlessly as I paced back and forth in our dimly lit living room. Laura's tear-streaked face haunted me, but it was her betrayal that ignited a fire within me, a fire that screamed for justice, for retribution. I couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation and anger coursing through my veins. I felt wronged, and the thought of her moving on with Jason while I wallowed in despair was unbearable. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed a plan, a way to make Laura and Jason face the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to feel the pain I was experiencing, to understand that their choices had real repercussions. As the clock ticked on, I began to plot my course of action, meticulously assembling the pieces of my revenge. First, I gathered all the evidence I had collected over the past few weeks. My phone buzzed with notifications, and I opened the folder filled with photos and screenshots. Each image told a story of betrayal: Laura and Jason laughing together at the cafe, her smiling face illuminated by the warm glow of the restaurant lights, his arm brushing against hers in a way that felt intimate and wrong. I had captured their private moments, and it was time to use them to expose their affair. I meticulously organized the images, ensuring I had a clear timeline of their meetings. Each photo was accompanied by the corresponding date and time, all documented in a detailed note on my laptop. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me as I crafted a narrative that showcased their betrayal, one that was undeniable and damning. But I knew I needed more than just images. I needed to document conversations as well, to provide a full picture of their deceit. I replayed the recordings of my eavesdropping sessions, where snippets of their conversations revealed the depth of their connection. Laura had confided in Jason about her frustrations with me, about how she felt trapped in our marriage. It was like a dagger to my heart, but I pushed the pain aside, knowing that this was part of the plan. In the days that followed, I continued to gather evidence. I started paying closer attention to Laura's phone habits, listening in on her calls whenever I could. It felt wrong, an invasion of her privacy, but the thought of her and Jason together spurred me on. I caught snippets of their conversations. The way she giggled at his jokes and spoke about work projects with an excitement I hadn't seen in months. I recorded as much as I could, knowing that each piece of information would serve my purpose. Then, I turned my attention to the company's internal communication systems. Laura and Jason often used company email for their work-related conversations, and I was determined to find a way to access them. It was a risky move, but my skills as a developer gave me a slight edge. I began to dig into the company's email directory, looking for loopholes and vulnerabilities that I could exploit. The thought of exposing their affair to everyone in the office was exhilarating, and the deeper I dug, the more I relished the idea of turning their lives upside down. As I compiled everything, I envisioned the moment when the truth would come crashing down on them. I imagined Laura walking into the office, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. I envisioned her colleagues whispering, casting sideways glances, and then the inevitable fallout when the truth became public knowledge. It was a fantasy that fueled me, pushing me to work late into the night, consumed by the details of my plan. With each passing day, my resolve solidified. I felt a sense of power as I pieced together the evidence, knowing I could unravel their lives. The thrill of revenge became my focus, an intoxicating mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. I was tired of feeling like a victim. I was ready to take control. The final piece of my plan fell into place when I decided to draft an anonymous email. I carefully crafted the message, ensuring it was precise and compelling. I wrote about Laura and Jason's affair, detailing the evidence I had collected and attaching the most damning photos. I painted a vivid picture of betrayal and deceit, making it impossible for the recipients to ignore. I even contemplated sending it to their supervisors, believing that the higher-ups should know about the unprofessional conduct taking place right under their noses. As I prepared to hit send, a rush of satisfaction coursed through me. I felt a sense of justice, of poetic retribution. Laura had made her choice, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. With a final deep breath, I clicked the button, and just like that, my plan was set in motion. The weight of the decision hung heavy on my shoulders, but a strange sense of relief washed over me. I had taken back some control over my life, and soon Laura and Jason would be forced to reckon with their choices. The thought of their reactions fueled me, and I found myself eagerly anticipating the chaos that would ensue. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I was ready to watch their world crumble. The day had finally arrived. I had meticulously planned every detail, and now it was time to set my revenge into motion. The anticipation surged through me like an electric current as I glanced at the clock, counting down the hours until Laura arrived at work for her important presentation. This wasn't just any day, this was the day I would expose her betrayal to the world, and the thought sent shivers down my spine. As I sat in my home office, I opened my laptop and reviewed the email I had drafted. The subject line read, "Serious Misconduct Report, Confidential," and I felt a mix of excitement and dread at what I was about to do. I took a moment to breathe deeply, steadying my nerves, before attaching all the evidence I had gathered: photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed account of their affair. Each piece felt like a confirmation of my pain, and I was ready to unleash it upon them. At precisely 8:30 a.m., I hit send, and a wave of adrenaline washed over me. It was done. I sent the email to the HR department and a few key executives in the company, ensuring it would be seen by those who could take immediate action. As I stared at the screen, a sense of satisfaction mingled with a flicker of uncertainty. I was about to change everything for Laura, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into dark waters I might not be able to navigate. I spent the morning pacing around my apartment, my mind racing with scenarios of what would unfold at the office. Would she deny it? Would she try to defend herself? The thoughts churned in my mind as I imagined her face when the truth came crashing down. Would she feel the same betrayal I had? I hoped so. Around noon, I received a text from one of my colleagues, asking if I had heard about the scandal brewing at the office. I felt a surge of satisfaction wash over me, but I also sensed a twinge of guilt. This was someone I once loved, and now I was the one orchestrating her public humiliation. I decided to drive to the office, hoping to witness the fallout firsthand. As I parked outside, I could see the building bustling with activity, people moving in and out, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I found a discreet spot across the street, my heart racing as I watched the entrance. I wanted to be close enough to see her, but far enough to remain unseen. It wasn't long before Laura arrived. She walked in confidently, dressed impeccably in her tailored suit, her hair perfectly styled. I could almost convince myself that nothing was wrong, but the reality was lurking beneath the surface. I leaned forward, straining to catch a glimpse of her as she walked through the doors. Moments later, I noticed the commotion inside. A group of employees gathered near the reception area, their voices hushed but filled with an electric tension. I could see the HR manager, a stern-looking woman, speaking to someone. My heart pounded as I realized that my email had reached its destination, and the repercussions were unfolding as I had envisioned. Suddenly, Laura appeared, her face a mask of confusion. She walked over to the group, clearly trying to understand what was happening. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at the sight of her uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming. The whispers began to grow louder, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. Then it happened. The HR manager pulled Laura aside, her expression serious. I watched from a distance, my heart racing, as Laura's expression shifted from confusion to shock. She glanced around, her colleagues looking at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. It was a sight I had both anticipated and dreaded, and I felt an unexpected pang of guilt rising within me. As the HR manager explained the situation, I could see Laura's eyes widen in disbelief. She began to shake her head, stammering in protest. "This can't be true. You must be mistaken," she exclaimed, her voice rising in desperation. But there was no escaping the truth. It was all laid bare in the evidence I had submitted. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Watching her struggle to defend herself, to explain away the unexplainable, filled me with a strange mixture of triumph and remorse. As the whispers grew louder, I felt a shift within me. Was this truly what I wanted? To see her publicly humiliated, stripped of her dignity? The satisfaction I had anticipated began to wane, replaced by a feeling of emptiness. With every passing minute, I watched as Laura's world crumbled around her. The colleagues who once praised her were now gossiping behind her back, casting sidelong glances filled with judgment. The humiliation etched on her face was palpable, and I could see her fighting to hold back tears as she pleaded her case. "You don't understand. I made a mistake, but I can fix this," she cried, her voice cracking. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the consequences were unfolding before my eyes. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach, realizing that revenge hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had hoped for. Instead, it felt like a hollow victory, a bitter reminder of what I had lost. As Laura was led away, presumably to a private meeting with HR, I felt my resolve weaken. The sense of justice I had sought transformed into a deep sadness, and I began to question whether my actions were worth the pain they had caused both of us. I had wanted her to feel what I felt, to experience the agony of betrayal. But now I was left with nothing but regret. I turned away, knowing that my plans had succeeded in exposing the truth, but they had also cost me something precious. The lines between revenge and remorse began to blur, and I realized that I was just as lost as she was. As the days passed, the initial thrill of my revenge faded, leaving behind a hollow emptiness that echoed in the corners of my mind. I found myself replaying the events of that fateful day in the office over and over, each repetition dulling the sharp edges of my satisfaction. What had I truly accomplished? Yes, I had exposed Laura's betrayal, but in doing so, I had stripped away the very essence of the love we had built together. I watched her from a distance, her usual vibrancy replaced by a shadow of defeat. Each time I caught a glimpse of her at the office, she looked smaller and more fragile. The confidence that once defined her was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that gnawed at my conscience. It was difficult to reconcile the woman I had loved with the one who stood before me, shattered by the consequences of her actions. In my mind, I had constructed a narrative where revenge would bring me closure, where seeing her humiliated would somehow heal the wounds of betrayal. But instead, I found myself feeling an overwhelming sense of grief, not just for our marriage, but for the loss of what we could have been. The anger that had fueled my actions began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sadness for the life we had once envisioned together. I took a long walk through the city, hoping the crisp Chicago air would clear my mind. As I strolled along the lakefront, I reflected on our life together. The late-night talks, the shared dreams, and the laughter that had filled our home. All of those moments now felt tainted by betrayal, but I couldn't deny their importance. Despite everything, I realized that our marriage had once been a source of joy and love, and I had thrown that away in the name of revenge. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I let my thoughts drift. What would have happened if I had confronted Laura directly instead of resorting to such drastic measures? Would we have been able to work through our issues? The what if spun in my mind like a tornado, and I felt a wave of regret wash over me. I had lost sight of what truly mattered: communication, understanding, and compassion. It was then that I saw a couple walking hand in hand, their laughter ringing out like music against the backdrop of the city. The sight stirred something deep within me, a longing for connection that I thought had been extinguished. I remembered the way Laura used to laugh, how her eyes would light up with joy, and I felt a pang of nostalgia. How had we let it come to this? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My desire for revenge had only perpetuated a cycle of pain. Laura had made a mistake, one that had devastated our relationship, but I had chosen to respond with cruelty. What had I gained? A moment of vindication that had swiftly given way to remorse? As I continued my walk, I began to consider the possibility of forgiveness, not just for Laura, but for myself. I had been hurt, and I had every right to feel that pain, but I also had the power to choose how to respond. I didn't want to carry this burden of resentment with me forever. It was exhausting and, in many ways, suffocating. Returning home, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I didn't know what the future held for Laura and me, but I understood that I needed to let go of the anger that had consumed me. My heart was heavy with the knowledge that our relationship was forever altered, but perhaps there was a way to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew that trust would take time, but the first step was to open a dialogue. I decided to reach out to Laura. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I wanted to talk, to hear her side of the story, and perhaps even share my feelings without the weight of accusation hanging over us. As I sat down to write the message, my hands trembled with uncertainty. But my heart felt lighter. I hoped that this could be the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could acknowledge our flaws and the mistakes we had made, and find a way to move forward, either together or apart. At that moment, I realized that the healing journey started with compassion, and it was a journey I was finally ready to embark on. With every passing day, I felt the weight of my past decisions lifting. I realized that the anger and resentment I had harbored towards Laura were no longer serving me. Instead, they were dragging me down into a cycle of negativity that I had grown tired of. It became clear that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to let go of the desire for revenge and embrace a new beginning. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my life, my priorities, and my passions. I had always been passionate about technology and innovation, but I had allowed my turmoil to overshadow my professional ambitions. Now, with a sense of clarity that had previously eluded me, I decided to redirect my energy towards my career. I began to take on more projects at work, diving headfirst into the challenges that excited me. I found myself staying late, collaborating with colleagues, and brainstorming ideas that could push our company forward. The sense of fulfillment I derived from my work reignited a spark in me that I thought I had lost. I had once been a rising star in my field, and it felt good to reclaim that part of myself. I started to focus on my professional development, attending workshops and networking events. I wanted to grow, to learn, and to elevate my career to new heights. Outside of work, I also rediscovered my hobbies. I had always loved painting, a passion I had set aside during the tumultuous years of my marriage. Picking up a brush again felt liberating, and as I lost myself in colors and strokes, I found solace. The canvas became my escape, a place where I could express my emotions without judgment. It was a therapeutic outlet that helped me process my feelings and gain clarity. I also reconnected with friends I had neglected. I began to prioritize relationships that mattered to me, those that brought joy and positivity into my life. I started going out more, enjoying the company of people who genuinely cared about me. I found myself laughing again, sharing stories, and making new memories. Each laugh felt like a small victory, a step away from the pain that had once defined me. As I embraced this new chapter, I decided to let go of the past, completely. I took down the photos of Laura and me, packed away mementos that reminded me of our time together, and decluttered my space. It was symbolic, a way of telling myself that I was moving on. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Laura. I was ready to create my own identity, independent and strong. In this journey of self-discovery, I found a renewed sense of purpose. I realized that life was too short to be consumed by bitterness. While I would always carry the lessons learned from my marriage, I wanted to focus on building a future that was filled with hope and possibility. Laura's journey took a different turn. The consequences of her actions weighed heavily on her, and I couldn't help but notice the transformation she underwent. Losing her job and facing public scrutiny had changed her, forcing her to confront the reality of her choices. I saw her walking the same streets we had once roamed together, but now she carried an air of uncertainty and vulnerability. In some ways, I felt compassion for her. I understood the loneliness and regret that accompanied such a public downfall. Laura was now faced with the daunting task of rebuilding her life from the ground up. She had to find a new job, restore her reputation, and confront the mistakes she had made. As I observed her from a distance, I recognized that we were both navigating uncharted waters, each grappling with our challenges. The lessons from our relationship lingered in my mind, and I began to see Laura's infidelity as an opportunity for growth. It was a painful lesson, but it prompted me to reevaluate what I truly wanted out of life. I learned that trust is fragile and that relationships require constant effort and communication. While I could never forget what had happened, I could choose to view it as a chapter in my life rather than the whole story. I made peace with the past, acknowledging that we both had made mistakes, hers in choosing betrayal and mine in choosing revenge. I knew that I would carry the scars of our relationship with me, but I also understood that they didn't have to define my future. I was determined to emerge stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As I stepped into my new life, I felt empowered. I had transformed my pain into purpose, allowing it to fuel my ambition and creativity. Laura had made choices that had changed our paths, but I had the power to choose my direction. I would move forward, ready to face new challenges, build new connections, and ultimately find happiness again. With every brushstroke on the canvas, every project at work, and every laugh shared with friends, I knew I was carving out a life that was uniquely mine. I was strong, independent, and free, a testament to the journey I had undertaken. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms, leaving the past where it belonged.